Hey folks, today I am joined by Angelica Schwartz, a former Stripe who I met recently online. We'll explain how we got to know each other. But, Angelica, I'm not going to introduce myself. People watch these videos all the time, hopefully. But I'll let you introduce yourself to our audience. So, Angelica, say hi.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name's Angelica. I studied computer science and math as undergrad, and then been a software engineer my whole career. So did 7 years at Google, working on different ads teams, and then most recently at Stripe for 2.5 years as well, working on a lot of API stuff.
Awesome. So great resume. So at Google, you said you worked on ad stuff. Tell me a little bit about what sort of products did you work on there? I worked on ads at Facebook for a while, so I have a little bit of domain knowledge here.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I worked on Google search ads. So I worked on cars, which is basically one of the highest like ad spend for
Hmm.
verticals. And then I also worked on YouTube ads. So really the full gambit of ads at Google.
Awesome. Well, that's cool. I didn't realize that before until just now. It's just the first time I realized that. But then we do have some common ground. You mentioned you worked at Stripe. We both worked there. I don't think we overlapped. I think we actually missed each other. Certainly never got to meet whilst we were
Yeah.
working there. Obviously, Stripe is a company. Zuplo being an API company, we talk about you folks all the time. A lot of what we do is inspired by Stripe. So tell us, what did you do? What did you do for Stripe?
Yeah, so I worked on a team called the Standard Library team, and we basically got to touch or look at like so many products across Stripe, like payments, Connect, all these different things. And so we were focused on kind of the evolution of APIs at Stripe. Where are we going? What have we learned from like the last 10 years? As well as like the developer experience and quality of the APIs today. So we owned and managed API review, which is the like centralized review that every Stripe API goes through before actually getting to users. So did a lot of API reviews in my time at Stripe.
Interesting. So passionate about the design of APIs, the experience. You mentioned the standard library team. So did you folks work on like frameworks as well? Did you like push code that everybody else used in when building APIs at Stripe?
Yeah, it was really about like designing the core domain models that would be shared between different products so that users would have like a consistent experience, whether they're entering from, product one or entering from product three. So it's really about designing like the core domain models, the core primitives that could be used across all Stripe products.
Interesting, cool. And when it comes to API review, so I talk about this a lot as well. So I was on the wrong side of this team. I think a lot of people were, right? So let me put
Yeah.
you in a place where, the payment methods team had something like 30 APIs, like, everything from OXO to, we had like a lot of surface area.
Yeah.
And we wanted to move fast, especially me coming from Facebook. I came like raring to go, wanted to ship things quickly. And it turns out that, there's a reason Stripe has a great API. That's because they spend a lot of time on sort of reviewing
A
and
lot of
making sure.
time.
And so, we'd have a team submit like the BNPL team was one of the ones I worked on for like buy now, pay later. Sorry to demystify the terminology. We'd submit a change. You folks were busy, so it would go into a queue. It would take you a little while to get to look at it, and then eventually some feedback would come back, and then we'd start that cycle again. Obviously painful for me on the like trying to push changes side, but it's hard to argue with the results. Like I think Stripe is still sort of seen as the gold standard for APIs. What did API review look like? Like, did you all sit? I like to imagine you all sat around a round table in like wizened hoods, like wizards. Like I called it the Jedi Council. The Jedi Council have said no again. Like what did
Yeah.
API review actually look like?
Yeah, you did have to get a cloak. That was a prerequisite. No, yeah. So we basically looked for, it was a set of experts across all different product areas. So folks with expertise on the APIs that exist today, where it's going, how the implementation will look, how it's going to be used by users. And we would effectively look at the API for user experience. Was it intuitive? Did it make sense? Did all the names, invoke what they actually mean? Consistency. So if one team across the company didn't know that another team was working on something similar, API review is sort of a central point to kind of make sure those were consistent experiences or kind of unify efforts if that was needed. And any other like paper cuts that we noticed during it. So it was a lot of writing out user journeys and like describing the shape and how an API would work basically at Stripe. So a lot of doc and API reading.
And what did the process look like? Because I never actually had much visibility. I think I was a product manager, and mostly I think the engineers dealt with you directly. Did it go to one person who does like a prior review, and then eventually it goes before an actual sort of council meeting, and there's like 6 of you sat in a darkened room with candles making
Yeah.
incantations?
Yeah, so it depends. Some folks had like their technical lead take a quick look before it actually gets to API review. So maybe they could catch like low hanging fruit or things like that. Sometimes it came directly to us. And then logistically, there was a lot of async feedback, commenting on docs, Slack, things like that. And then if needed, sync meetings as well to kind of discuss the design. So it could be quick. A small feature could be quick, kind of get automatically approved if it used the same names, very self-explanatory. It could also be, weeks, if not months for like a major change, especially ones that deviate a lot from like existing Stripe patterns. Because like you said, Stripe does a lot of thinking about how it should work and what the users are doing with it.
Was there a lot of automation? I had no insight to this either. Was there like automatic linting rules that you ran? Did you use Spectral? The open source open API. Lots of questions here. I'll let you answer the one about automation first.
There were varying parts of automation. I think there's potential even for more in this space. So I think like a lot of the workflows were automated. Some things could be caught on code review, but a lot of it was manual. And so we had kind of just started, right before I left, looking into how could we codify design patterns and kind of check them as a second check from like a human reviewer. But we were kind of just getting started on that piece.
Interesting. And did you folks use OpenAPI much? Was OpenAPI used as a documentation standard, or was that something you used internally as a sort of I guess a specification that was used for communication?
Yeah, I think honestly, most of the reviews happen in docs. And
Right.
so I think that there's certainly a lot of opinions on whether that should say docs, move to code, move to some sort of schema. But yeah, at the time that I was reviewing, it was mostly in docs.
It's interesting, right? It sort of tells us a little bit that perhaps the council felt very strongly about the intent and the meaning and the flow and the workflow around the API, which is hard to capture in an open API spec, which just looks like a bunch of endpoints. And yes, there are some docs on it. But when you say doc, it was like I can't remember if we used Google Docs or whatever, but it was just like a
Yeah,
document. Someone
like
wrote long
a
form,
Google
said
Doc.
this is
Yeah.
the REST endpoint, and then you folks would go in there and comment on that, etc., and give feedback.
That's right. That's right. And it was really good for collaboration, both between the reviewers and the submitters, other reviewers. And so that was really a key point. There's a lot of discussion that goes into that. And so the collaboration was pretty easy in docs.
Did you run into many impasses? Like how did you make decisions when there was a lock, or there's it's a fairly religious, if I can use that phrasing, thing to make decisions about at some point, right? Like whether X is better than Y is not always like canonical. How did you resolve impasses in the council?
I think like the main principle is users first. And so if you could get user feedback, maybe do a user research session or any other feedback on how the user's going to use it, what they think these names mean, that is really the ultimate tiebreaker. And so the less we can spend guessing and the more we can get actually getting that user feedback, the better. And so I think that's kind of the ultimate tiebreaker is what does the user need? What do they want? How are they interacting with this?
Oh, that's interesting. So there's points where you're debating, say, nomenclature, and you're like, look, we can't make a decision on this until someone goes and gets some like user research and ask them what do they think fibble bubble means, or etc., and what's the right term. Like that was actually like a thing you folks would push back on occasionally.
Yeah, and there's different stages of APIs. Being in beta, you're going to get like more beta feedback. And so we say, go out with this, but let's revisit before like a general release and things like that. So yeah, basically getting feedback from users could be a touch point to help inform what would like ultimately go out for a full launch.
Awesome. Okay. Well, it's really cool to get to meet someone who works on that team, given I kind of talk smack about you also. Big fans of your work, though. Big fans of your work. Obviously, I talk about the Stripe API all the time. But you're not at Stripe anymore. You have
I'm
made the
not.
difficult decision to move on and do something else, and so you're doing your own startup now, I believe. So please tell us all about it. Pitch away. Tell us the story.
Yeah, so we're called Elevate. And so, we're still in the early stages, but effectively we are building financial infrastructure for AI agents. So, what
Hmm.
does that mean? Our first product is basically an autonomous checkout product. So, we can buy anything online. So, if you're an AI assistant, maybe a shopping assistant making recommendations, you would use us to ultimately go and make that purchase.
So let me paraphrase that, see if I've understood it. When I use ChatGPT, I can use these plugins to get real work done, right? Like that's how it interacts with the world, or searches Bing, or whatever it's doing. And I might be at a point where I'm going to say to ChatGPT, "Hey, go and buy me a pair of socks with a cool pattern," and I just want it to complete the transaction. It has my credit card details. It's going to use your API, your plugin to do this. Like that's the idea.
That's the idea. That's right.
That is awesome. How does it? How do you build a checkout for an AI? Then what's different? Is it just an API with an open API doc? Like what's the changes there?
Yeah, the API side is, kind of similar to how you would do API development. It's really the implementation of that API that gets tricky. So, some of these merchants have easy ways to interface with them and make purchases, like their own API, but a lot of them don't. And so, what do you kind of do in the absence of an API? So, these are the types of challenges we're getting into in the actual like implementation of the product.
Interesting. And who are your customers today? Are they sort of customers that might use a Stripe like product, or is it consumers? Who are the sort of people you're trying to sell to effectively today?
Yeah, so we're kind of in the AI agent space. So imagine either your personal AI assistant
Hmm.
who might be getting you paper towels when you run out. They could use us. These AI shopping recommendation tools.
Hmm.
So let's say I need a dress for a wedding, it can recommend me the best dress for my size and for the occasion. Then we can actually go and make the purchase. So use cases like that.
That is very, very cool. I mean, I've seen some interesting reviews around the Rabbit, but the Rabbit is just like they call it. Have you seen this Rabbit R1 device?
I
And it
have,
has this
yes.
lamb model. I've seen lots of news about it. We won't get into that, but that has this idea of an action model. So the concept is
Hmm.
sort of similar. You would be an action on that of actually making a purchase. So maybe even if I was to order my Uber via this thing, the way the Uber would get paid for could be via Elevate,
That's
your
right.
company.
That's right.
So the company's called Elevate. Where would I go and read more about it? I assume you have a website.
Yeah, so you can find us at useelevate.dev, DEV, and then we're also on Twitter, use Elevate AI, and LinkedIn, Elevate AI.
Okay, we'll put links in the section underneath here on YouTube. So go and check out Angelica's awesome new company. Now, the reason we became acquainted, though, is because, and this really is something I'm super excited and happy about, is you decided to use Zuplo to launch your API. And before I ask you more about that, I want to explain. When we launched Zuplo, we built an API management product that we felt was suitable for the high end of the market, like traditional big enterprises. But one thing we wanted to do different was build a product that was sort of so easy to use that we would help, startups like yours or small businesses launch their API. And one of the taglines we said is like it's like an API quality experience. That's what we aim for anyway, out of the box. And so when someone from the Stripe dreaded API review council shows up and uses Zuplo, it is like, to me, it's in a way indirectly the greatest compliment. Like we're just super thrilled that you're using the product. So tell us a little bit about how you found us, what you're building, how we fit into your stack, and so how is Zuplo a part of your story?
Yeah, so I discovered Zuplo because I basically had a weekend to like get a first version of our product up and working. And so I started actually from the database side. And so I had chosen Supabase for
Hmm.
our database structure. and I was trying to figure out how to put a REST API on Supabase. That wasn't the most intuitive, so I basically was just searching around for how to build an API with Supabase, and one of your videos, it was your face in the thumbnail,
with the slide.
came up. Yeah, that was basically how to use Zuplo with Supabase, and so that's how I like discovered Zuplo, and then started using it and discovered more of the feature set.
So one of the, I think when I chatted to you before, there was a couple of features that got you excited. So that was, let me just elaborate what I think you're saying about the Supabase thing. So Supabase, awesome product, big fans of what they're doing over there. But they're very focused on Postgres. They help you surface Postgres as an API. They have functions and authentication too, which we support on our dev portal. But in terms of like taking that sort of generic REST, what would you call it? It's almost like SQL over REST API,
Yeah.
and turning that into a very custom, focused, scenario-oriented REST API. It's a bunch of work, right? And so one of the things we talk about Zuplo is as a gateway, it's a really great way to do a simple transformation from, create payment that's actually in the background is doing like an insert into the payments table, and maybe even a little bit of orchestration, like calling a couple of endpoints and so on. I think that was one of the things you got from Zuplo. But then the other thing was auth and things like API keys. And, I think you're using our API key solution, right?
Yep, that's right. And those were sort of the types of things that coming from Stripe, I really wanted. It's almost like default for me, but it's
Yeah.
not that easy. Like I wanted a API key in one line solution, which was like very hard to find. And so I think getting those types of things like rate limits and able to set rate limit policies, that's like for a startup, unfortunately, more like nice to have. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really nice that you kind of get those out of the box. So it's still that kind of polished developer experience. But it's just like a couple of clicks in my Zuplo portal.
Which is awesome. And folks, she's not lying, but building API key auth and doing it correctly is not trivial. There's a link to another video called API key best practices, most of which are just bluntly sort of stolen from what Stripe do. Like prefixes on keys, doing GitHub secret scanning. I mean, that's how you build secure API keys, right? The fact you can get analytics on what you've done with your key and so on. All that stuff is a lot of it is inspired by Stripe. That's awesome. And then one of the funniest things was you didn't realize that we included a developer portal, right? Until you were sort of halfway through building this thing. And so tell us about how that went.
Yeah, I think Docs and Developer Portal is another one of those polishes. Like it's really that's what the user interface is with. So it's quite important for like how you're portraying what your product is. But it's just another thing to build. So I had a different provider for Docs, and then I saw that I basically get it with Suplo, and so I switched, and so I don't have to like manually maintain those Docs. It's pulling right now from my like Open API spec. And so everything's in one place. So yeah, now our dev portal is also on Zuplo.
Awesome. And it's so cool to hear. It's so cool to hear, especially from someone like yourself. So we talked about this. So how long did it take you to get this done? So you went from sort of starting your Zuplo project to having your Stripe quality experience, if I can say that. How long did it take?
Yeah, I think it was that weekend. Like I had my first version working, could run, test requests and stuff in a weekend through Supabase, all of that too.
So congrats and tip of the hat to Supabase, who are doing a great job on the back end there. And obviously, just you heard it here, folks, the Stripe quality, Stripe in a box in a weekend with API key auth, rate limiting, and a developer portal to boot. So awesome. You're a builder customer, I think. So, we're hopefully giving you a good deal there as well, and helping your
Yeah.
startup be successful without like breaking the bank. Thank you so much for being a customer, and thanks for coming to hang out today and tell us about what you did at Stripe. And I'm sorry for all the bad things I said about your team. I wasn't really that harsh, but it was definitely a blocker. But no, I mean, obviously important. I think this is an interesting. Actually, it's an interesting thing we think about at Zuplo, where we would like to work on this problem as well. and help
Mm.
folks automate it. Because I think, especially with AI and Gen AI, there's like a lot of opportunity to take a lot of the mundane parts of that work, and automate it now, which is good for the teams that have to do the reviews because there's less mundane stuff to do. It's also good for the teams that are submitting the reviews because the feedback loop is much faster, right? The silly things we kind of get out of the way real quick, and then it saves time for the really meaty discussion. So watch this space. We have some stuff coming on this in the future. Angelica, thanks for coming to hang out, and thanks for being a Zuplo customer.
Yeah, it was great meeting you. Thanks for having me. And yeah, excited to see what Zuplo does next.